Hello, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Let's play chess. League starts on Monday. My division starts on Monday. Okay. Sorry about that. A little bit of a sojourn, of a break or so. Not sojourn's a trip. A break is a break. Some time off, something like that. We want to put this mostly out of view so it doesn't distract me. Okay. I'm going to start with game in 10 minutes per side per game. Okay. Give me a minute or two here, folks. We're gonna go over this game. I'll let it run in the while I take a break here. Okay. Got my joysticks charging. In the meantime, we'll let this finish playing out, and then I'm gonna review this game. It's a really high quality game. Uh, Full of time pressure and nuance and tactics, strategy, last minute heroics, and a lot of accuracy on both sides. Uh, wow, this was a true pleasure. I played against Wostanov, and it was a real thrill. So thank you to my opponent Wostanov for that. I hear now the board is completely settled, but I have 17.1 seconds. And there's some issues concerning maybe stalemating on the queen side, on the king side here in black side of the camp. So first I wanted to get rid of the pawn. For whatever reason, it was what I chose, and I was in a time cramp, and it wasn't wrong. And my opponent is taking time here on the king side as I decide to, and I make a few correct moves to correctly convert this already won game. So, wow, what a blast! Like I said, accurate, 89%, 81%. I'm cool with that. We're going to review mostly out of the end. I think this is called the analysis screen, and I'll offer my thoughts on the game. I'll try. I think one challenge for me would not to lean too much on Torch 4. I will definitely consult Torch 4 in my analysis, but let's see how much we can sort of get there on our own. Okay, so e4, c5, c4. This is a way to access the English opening by way of both the king's pawn opening and the Sicilian defense to the king's pawn opening. So you play c4 here, and you're in. You've sort of curtailed many of the different options to one c4, and so we're in this opening here. I find it's a nice opening to get your pawn out in front of your knight. White and black both get some really straightforward piece development, and the game takes shape from there. One of the questions is White's queen's bishop. In other words, White's dark squared bishop. Where's he gonna move? D2 has happened, E3 has happened, F4 has happened, G5 has happened. So there's a number of squares for the queen's bishop, and sometimes even after B3. I believe I've played a game where bishop goes to B2, and so that's happened. D6 is fine, makes way for the light squared bishop, so maybe a little bit passive, one would say. A little bit passive, maybe leads to a slightly more cramped position, but it's not, what's black gonna do? The D pawn moves, it's gonna get gobbled up on D5, so D6 instead. It shows flexibility. Knight to C3, just natural development. These are all normal developing moves. You think of bishop to E2, you might say, well, he's not doing all that. He didn't travel all that much. He's not doing all that much. But remember, back here when I made the decision to play bishop e2, as I have in other games, the bishop's two available moves were bishop e2 or bishop d3. You can play bishop d3. You have to know to drop back to c2 thereafter, or you should know to drop back to c2 thereafter. And so that's playable, but there's only two moves available for this bishop, and white's got to get his kingside castle in one way or another. So e2 was the square, and my bishop found it. Yes, pawn to e6. I wouldn't have played this. This is a good move. It's sticking within this rather cramped position for black, save for the bishop at g4, who's nothing but cramped. Or was nothing. He's nothing in the way of being cramped. Save for that, this is a cramped position for black. You know, I would have rather seen. I don't know. I'd rather seen. Better said. I would have played e5. You know, but that's a whole different thing, because then there's a whole, get it, on d5 for my knight to jump in and be very secure and a real powerful knight all the while. So d6 prevents the knight from occupying the d5 square. So that's also worthy of good notice. h3 is good. Yeah, h3 is fine here, because why not? At worst, bishop to h4 and then kingside castles for white. So then you've created a look for your king in the end game or the late middle game, and what? So h3, you know, why not? If the bishop captures on f3 like we saw in the game, then capture with your bishop, and you've got the potential of the long diagonal h1 to a8. Alright, so the bishop captures. It's considered a great move, and I recapture. So after, well, we're only after 7 moves. Let's play a couple more. Queen d4 was the result of, I'm not sure, a long think. Well, almost 20 seconds, 18 seconds. I thought about the move before making queen d4, and I thought of this as a long-term move. This is more about strategy than tactics, though of course tactics feed in. But my idea is the pin on the knight could prove bothersome in the long term. Even include that. The queen pinning the knight to the king could be a long-term problem for black, and it's completely viable tactically. So clearing the arrows is completely viable tactically. Pawn to b5 is met with c takes b5, a takes b5, then with queen takes b5, and these exchanges actually help probably white, but only by a little bit. This knight is now pinned, and with no defenders to the king, and the rook slides over, and maybe the queen blocks the pin. But it's not. Personally, I'd say this isn't entirely clear. Whether queen to a4, you know, this looks like a good testing move to see if your opponent can defeat the idea. The idea is that this knight is pinned for a long while. So my opponent was clue to that right away. Rook c8 is an excellent move. It kind of it's actually, frankly, a good response. Then why make a4? I knew that rook c8 could occur. I thought still this is a better presence for the queen than on e2. She's here on a4. You know, they say don't bring your queen out too early. Well, first of all, this is move 8. Not right away, but also it's really, as I've been taught, don't bring your queen out too early to a square or a place where she may be kicked, or where an opponent's piece could develop with an attack attached to it against the queen that costs the side with the queen, with whose queen is being attacked, initiative, a tempo of initiative. To move back to d1 for instance, would be just a waste of. Many people call it time. I call it initiative because uh, I took time and I thought that it could mean a couple things. So initiative versus clock in my world is how we talk about initiative and how we talk about literally the clock. Okay, so now that we're clued in on that, the queen's fine on a4. She's not going to get kicked. You see that she has this diagonal relationship with one square in between to oppose the knight on c6. That means the knight on c6, he's not getting to that queen all too soon. All right. We went through that the pawn advance b5 is covered well enough. It actually even better, if there's a weakness to rook c8, it's that b5 is not as serious a move for black now because the square is just covered 3 times. So queen a4 is a sort of a long-term move, a good long-term move, and white is going to castle. I hope so. Yeah, castle soon enough. d3 or maybe even d4. I'm not exactly sure. And then the dark squared bishop goes somewhere useful. a3. a3 mostly preparing b4. I've amassed some troops and firepower on black's side of the board on the queen side. Right? There's a decent amount of firepower. As they say in X-Men, in chess, the pawns go first. I think Magneto says that in one of the X-Men movies. So in chess, the pawns go first. And I played a3. It seems like this, no such thing kind of move, but it is protecting b4. Is protecting the move pawn from b2 to b4 so strongly that it's I think a fine move. All my bases are covered here. The pawn is covered twice. This pawn is loose but not attacked, so I'm going to head on with this queenside pawn storm. Black castles probably wisely. I mean, in the nick of time almost. Some of black's recent moves have been about... No, not all of them. Anyway, black castles, it's a good move because with the knight pinned, there's only so long black can sustain this knight while it's pinned before I play something like e5, which has to be addressed because it's attacking a minor piece and the pawn would most likely capture. Then you have 2 pieces attacking on c6. 2 defenders, so we're starting to get closer. Just tactics start to creep in if black doesn't castle here. How long was this game? This game was long, so I might have to take a break. I think let's try to get it all. Let's try to review the whole game. On second thought, we'll review the whole game. Knight to e5 is a strong move, nice and central. He is unassailed at e5, nothing attacking the e5 square. It's a knight that's protected. If I wanted to go to to upset him with my knight at c3, like I said, separated by one square like this, it'll take my knight. That doesn't help. It'll take my knight a long time. Alright, so this knight is an immediate threat against the square. So we might think of the bishop, and the bishop isn't hitting at anything right away when it moves to b3. And the dark squared bishop has the pawn at d2 in the way. This is not the correct color bishop. So this knight on e5 is very strong. White would do well to probably address that. I'm pretty sure I did with bishop to e2. On the one hand, controlling the knight. Controlling this knight to an extent too. But on the one hand, controlling the knight. I'll take the red things off when it's just we're controlling the e5 knight, and white's gonna push f4 most likely, f4 or d4 to get this e5 monster someplace a little bit more palatable for our side. We're a little bit more away from our king. You know, he's one move away from placing forth a check on the white king. So we'd like to get this knight, you know, nice on g6, perhaps d7. These placements for the knight don't bother white quite as much. So let's see how I handled that in the game. b6. I don't know. I don't know why my opponent played b6 here. There's perhaps if I play b6 first, then that frees my bishop up a lot, my queen up a lot, my knight up some amount. So my opponent might be playing b6 as a like solidifying move, or a little bit of a. I think sometimes they call them a prophylactic move. Pawn to b6. Yeah, I don't think it's the greatest of moves in this game. It's not the greatest of moves because it gives white some chance maybe to gang up on the b6 pawn by way of getting, you know, nice, close, and cozy with some major pieces on the a file. So I don't think it's all that great, but then again, it does help control the bishop, whose job right now is to control the e5 knight. So that I don't know. I look for other subtle moves to make than b6. Next up, I played d4. I told you I was going to push this knight away with a pawn, so that's what I'm doing. The knight goes back to d7. It's not a horrible move, but it probably belongs on g6, where it helps prevent the advance of pawn to e5, capture, and then so much so as to win material in the case of a premature e5 pawn push. My opponent played knight to d7, which is considered a miss. I wouldn't say so. It's not that bad. Look, the board is in favor of white. White has more space. White has more space. Materials even. Both sides have enough time on their clock, given the time controls and all that. Both kings are safe. Mobility is in favor of white. Most definitely in favor of white. White has a moderate, almost a strong lead, I'd say, in terms of mobility. Has a maybe yeah. This is a strong lead in mobility. I mean, white has to solve what's going on with the c3 knight, but after that, his pieces are all superior, almost all superior. So for this rook is black's strongest piece, and it's not all that outrageous to think of it as like a good piece, but not a great piece. So white really dominating in terms of mobility. What did we material, even mobility, initiative. Then we talked about clock and then initiative. It's white's turn to move, and I wouldn't. There may be a slight amount of initiative on top of that, owing to the fact that e5 is a good push, that d5 is a good push, and so that's initiative. We had something else. There were other parts. Clock, initiative, mobility, material, space. We looked at space. White has an advantage in space. And king safety. Both sides have safe kings. So this is a good board for white to prove the truth behind intangible advantages. Right? White has no extra material here. But this would be a great position. This would be a great position with white to move, to play out one side and then the other against your friends. Oops. White should be winning most of the time, even though there's no material advantage. All right, so on we go. I said the knight at c3 had to be addressed because of the attack from black's rook at c8. I chose bishop to b2. It's a great way to back up the knight at c3. Gets the job done, and it's all potential from there on out for white's dark squared bishop. Queen c7. That kind of gave away one of the great moves to play out. When you play this position against your opponents, sometimes play b2, but not every single time, or else it's always going to be b2, and then you might as well be playing this move against your chess playing opponents and friends. Black played queen to c7, which is a good move. It allows more breathing room for the f8 rook, but I'm going to take a second or two and think, why might queen to c7 look nice and then on second thought not be quite as big a deal? There's something good thoughts. It's not a bad move, but it's also not that great a move. So we'll count to 3. 1, 2, 3. 3, 2, 1. Look, queen to c7 doubles up on the c file, where some really strong major pieces are attacking a protected piece on c3. Bishop doesn't care. If that queen comes to town and captures on c3, he'll capture that queen. He won't be all that upset about it. Neither will white. Right? This is a very valuable piece leading the charge here. Like I said earlier, with in chess, the pawns go first from X-Men. That black's leading with its most valuable capturable piece. So as long as white can maintain good control over the knight at c3, this isn't so bad. There are also tempting moves for white to play, like rook to c1, and all of a sudden there's some really powerful tactics unloading onto pretty much all over the chessboard. The rook on c1 is adequately defended, and so this is by its own, it's not such a bad move, but black might be stepping into a bit of dynamite here. So let's see. I played rook c1 because that potential can't be ignored, and then queen b7 makes more sense now, just to step aside and have the queen on some kind of diagonal here. They say, like, why doesn't black do something more active? This is active because of how constricted black's pieces are. This is active. Even if it takes 2 moves, this is active. Getting on this strong diagonal, and that's that. All right, we move forward, and black closes the position more or less with e5, but I wasn't having it. I wanted to trade these queens and gang up. Mostly my idea is to gang up on b6. You can't control everything. I thought, well, maybe I'll pick up the bishop for free, haha. But no, my opponent was square to the task with knight takes d5. Not sure. Yeah, I found the correct move here, which is d takes e5. The idea out of this is it's just correct calculation. D takes e5, d takes e5, bishop takes e5. White now has that material advantage that so often tilts the game. Knight d7, just pushing the issue. With pawn d6, I see that this is an inaccuracy. And you know what does well in a material world, or when there's material exchanges and so on to be, you know, calculated? Torch. You cannot use it during a game, or that's just outright wrong. But with pawn to d6, I'm thinking there's a lot. Like, let's take one of the early examples. If knight takes on e5, then white wins the exchange with bishop takes b7. So that's not on. Bishop moves away, and it's bishop takes b7. There's some variations where the pawn is just quicker and weaker, if you will, to gobble up more chess pieces, right? With black moves, so maybe knight takes e5, pawn takes e7, and black might have been okay here. This was perhaps how it was played, because then rook takes e7 pretty much shows that white doesn't have anything against it. But if black goes on to be a gourmand and munch all these pieces that he can, so bishop takes e5, or knight takes e5, knight takes f3 check. I think white is still quicker with bishop takes e7. With pawn takes e7, pawn takes f8 check, king takes f8, and then wherever the knight is, the pawn will have gathered more material to a greater extent. Let's take a look at this. This is actually, it becomes this, you see this from time to time, the theme where a pawn is simply faster in I take, you take, I take, you take, but that they're separate parts of the board and they're not interacting. Sometimes the pawn is simply faster. Now here, yeah, you wouldn't take on e7 here, so some of this is clarifying. You don't capture on e7 here, you capture the rook, and white is ahead material. Alright, now we know. I think this is what happened in the game. Yeah, okay, good. Best games in the game were played. Let's scroll this a bit so I don't make that mistake as much in the future. Now, while white has a 2-point material lead, remember, we were living in material world. White has a 2-point material lead, so just exchanging pieces. Rook to a8. My goal is to exchange material. And with rook to a8, I'm guaranteed to exchange material, or just about. Right, that guarantee is still there. The rook's looking to escape. That's a good move. That's the best move. Rook to d8. Black is facing complications, so simplifies. I would. And looking at mostly just some accurate endgame moves, endgame sequences. It's important here to capture with the bishop. The bishop is the right piece to capture on f7. First of all, you capture with the rook right away, you lose your bishop. So that's exactly that part. But also the bishop is capturing on f7. That's another pawn, and looks like one of these two pawns is probably going to get captured as well. I don't recall, maybe there were some complications that strayed us away from that. But bishop takes f7 is the way to go, and then a few complications here. Move here to, with the bishop being attacked, but also defended from afar. Maybe just keep it. I might have just kept it there. Pawn to f4, and the knight's pressed to make a decision. There aren't all that many squares that are safe for black's knight here, so might Black would probably trade on f7, and then, well, maybe Black would have lost his knight for bishop in the endgame, which seems good, but then again, it was an off-color bishop. Not like he was telling bad jokes, but that the two bishops were of different square color. And that might be fine for white too, because otherwise it's more likely that Black can erect a fortress of some sort, beyond which white pieces might not venture. A barricade, really. It's probably better called a barricade. All this to say, on that position, knight takes f7. Rook h6 check. And then finally, yeah, Black might have had a better move than h5 because of the tactic that follows. Might have had a better move than king to e7 because of this tactic. Either way you slice it, the rook is going to capture on e5. And even in time control, I can close out after this exchange sacrifice, which works perfectly well. And I didn't need to activate my king. I did, sort of last minute jitters, I suppose. White to move here would of course play b7, not king to e2. And the Black kingdom's closer, and it's going to be checkmate. Sometimes you're allowed to play a mini game. The mini game here is keep the black pieces alive. Shouldn't have said that. I'm sorry. Maybe I should have said that. It's not the end of the world to say that. Okay, so this is a slightly different ending to this great game. We'll go back to how I ended it. Mostly with pre-moves and logic, which is going to put our bishop in the way of the c5 knight so that my opponent can't surprise me, right? I know with the bishop blocking this, not knight, c5 pawn, with the bishop blocking c5 and the pawn blocking h4, these pawns they can't even be moved, so I can't be surprised, at least in terms of what piece to move next. So that's a great thing in pre-moving, because it's a whole different lecture, my friends, but it confers an advantage so that you don't get surprised and lose time correcting the line that you had put in place in the first place. It's as best as I can say that. Alright, we can see that this part of the game is mostly about knowing your end game, knowing your rook pawns sometimes draw, right? Sometimes in king and pawn end games, if it's a rook pawn, very often the defending side draws, so that puts me in a position where I'm thinking I'll play pawn to g5 check. Well, not check, but sooner or later the pawn on g5 is going to deliver a check, or queening with checkmate, or both. But so as to be careful not to stalemate black and end up with a tie, a draw. In chess it's a draw, but it's a lot like a tie in some ways. Not to end up with a draw, and instead a win. There's checkmate on move 69, and what a fabulous game. I applaud my opponent. A very strong game on her or they part. And I felt like I played very strongly as well. We're going to review that. And we're winding down here, folks. I'm going to give my usual send-off in a few moments. I want to see exactly how accurate the game might have been with that adjustment where the b pawn went to make a queen instead of dealing with all these extra concerns. It's a better and more direct path to victory. So yeah. Wow, that's great, Jord. This is great. Way to go. Yeah, Jord. Alright, thank you so much for watching. Thank you, Gravitrons. I'm more gravity. Have a great night.